If we fail to protect the high seas, we risk turning our oceans into a barren wasteland. These were the dramatic words whispered by a concerned delegate at the recently concluded Third United Nations Ocean Conference in the city of Nice in the year 2025. Yes, you heard that right. Some people feared we were on the brink of allowing unregulated deep-sea mining, overfishing, and pollution to push marine ecosystems to the point of no return. What is really going on at these grand conferences? And how is all of this connected to the global community's pledges, tensions, and elusive breakthroughs on saving our seas? Today we dive deep into the swirling currents of ocean diplomacy, unraveling the week-long negotiations, shocking revelations, and triumphs that emerge during this pivotal event. In this program, we will explore how nations struggled to ratify international agreements, the drama behind environmental non-governmental organizations demanding urgent action, and whether huge declarations like the Nice Ocean Action Plan will truly hold water or simply evaporate into yet another empty promise. For 5 days in the French Riviera, government leaders, climate experts, representatives from coastal nations, remote island states, and major figureheads of oceanographic movements rubbed shoulders in what was described as a hothouse atmosphere of intense diplomacy. The question on everyone's mind was, is this just another talk fest, or can something real finally happen to safeguard oceans that cover over 2/3 of our planet's surface? You see, many observers arrived with more than a bit of cynicism. After all, previous summits on ocean protection have often ended in lofty announcements that never translated into durable progress. So, it is no wonder that the debate started out with tension in the air, spurred by how often governments promise protective measures for the seas before quietly scaling them back. To truly assess what went down in Nice, we should begin with the star attraction of this conference, the newly minted political declaration referred to as the Nice Ocean Action Plan. Over 170 countries formally adopted it, accompanied by promises of expanded marine protected areas, stricter limits on marine pollution, and direct financial assistance for developing coastal and island nations. One might think, this sounds like a major victory. Why all the doubt? As we soon discovered, there is a considerable gap between sealing an agreement in a large conference hall and following through with binding, consistent enforcement once delegates return home. Nevertheless, the plan calls for the introduction of costed actions, actual budget numbers, to back up each vow. That might be significant, or it could be a mere public relations exercise. The truth will depend on how intensely governments feeling. The pinch of domestic pressure will continue to invest in these commitments. But perhaps the largest milestone was the long-neglected High Seas Treaty, an agreement that aims to protect 30% of the world's oceans by the year 2030. This elusive treaty received an important boost when enough countries either ratified it on the spot in Nice or made near-future commitments to ratification. Without a legally enforceable agreement, the high seas, which constitute nearly 2/3 of all oceanic areas, remain largely outside direct national jurisdiction and are open to exploitation. For decades, environmental campaigners have warned us that many fishing fleets have used this vast unregulated domain to haul in massive catches, deplete fish stocks, and disrupt vital marine ecosystems. Now, if the treaty gains enough support, it will empower the world community to design robust, protected regions across the high seas. Yet there was one sobering reality. At least 60 ratifications in total are required for this treaty to come into force, and by the summit's close, the number had only reached 50. This momentum might, however, be the jolt needed for lagging states to sign up as well. To get a sense of how dramatic the conference was, you only had to speak with the exhausted staff at the UN's NGO liaison desks. They navigated the swirling energies of hundreds of environmental groups, each with its own distinct focus, whether plastic debris, coral reef decay, or microplastic research. Tensions erupted at press briefings, usually after a day of intense negotiations, as these campaigners demanded immediate, real demonstrations that the agreements would do more than pay lip service to ocean protection. One staff member admitted privately that these summits are powder kegs, because the United Nations must juggle the delicate politics of its member states with the urgent pleas of activists who feel that the sands of time are running out. Indeed, critics noted that the severity of wildlife decline in the oceans, combined with rising sea levels threatening coastal populations, suggests that the planet cannot afford endless polite negotiations. Nevertheless, the final press release from official channels was characteristically upbeat, describing the multi-day, multi-sea stakeholder approach as an essential stepping stone toward building a more sustainable future for the seas. But the difference, as many pointed out, lies in the emphasis on enforceability. Past commitments often drowned in vague language, so activists pinned their hopes on the mention of actual legal frameworks for punishing overfishing and punishing or curbing deep-sea mining. The UN Secretary General, who urged world leaders to treat this as a last-chance saloon for ocean diplomacy, used his final address to hammer home that these voluntary commitments will be meaningless unless states transform them into enforceable regulations. At Nice, the tensions extended beyond philanthropic conservation bodies. One eye-catching example was the newly formed High Ambition Coalition for a Quiet Ocean, comprising 37 countries, co-led by Canada and Panama, and including Ireland. Their mission is to reduce acoustic pollutions that can severely disrupt marine life, such as whales and dolphins. Underwater noise pollution arises significantly from shipping, underwater drilling, and construction activities. On one hand, it seems like a small, specialized piece of the puzzle. On the other, this coalition's echoes remind us that the health of the ocean depends on controlling a multitude of stressors, from chemical pollution to climate change and noise. Meanwhile, Germany launched an ambitious €100 million action plan to sweep the Baltic Sea and North Sea of dangerous World War II-era munitions that have been corroding on the seafloor for decades. Indonesia and the World Bank, for their part, have introduced what they call a coral bond, a financial mechanism intended to channel private investments into the restoration of critical coral reef habitats. Despite those glimmers of creativity, people following the conference have questioned how quickly these schemes can be executed. Given that each year sees more damage to marine ecosystems, can we afford the time it takes to formalize those initiatives? Another source of friction came from an unlikely place, the United States of America. Observers quickly noticed that there was no prominent, high-ranking U.S. delegation in attendance. Now, many recall that the U.S. administration under Donald Trump had moved to expedite deep-sea mining licenses in both domestic and international waters, explaining it as an economic boost. That stance seemed to directly oppose the majority sentiment in Nice, where delegates insisted that the deep ocean must not become a wild frontier for unregulated extraction. The Secretary General singled out the deep-sea debate by stating that these waters cannot be treated like the Wild West, a pointed remark that some believed was squarely aimed at the U.S. However, there was no large-scale public confrontation, largely because official U.S. representatives were less vocal and avoided major press engagements. At the heart of the entire matter was the fundamental question: what actual enforcement mechanisms might accompany these lofty statements? Historically, the UN system has limited capacity to impose penalties. Many argue that nations must choose to participate in collective enforcement, for example by refusing to buy fish or minerals from vessels that do not follow sustainable guidelines. Yet this is easier said than done. As an activist from Ocean Rebellion pointed out with biting sarcasm, they say progress, we see deterioration, because we are already losing so many coral reefs, species, and coastal habitats that we do not have time to merely stand still. Interestingly, Ocean Rebellion made quite the theatrical statement on the sidelines of the summit by dressing up in costumes ridiculing prominent figures, including a blindfolded portrayal of French President Emmanuel Macron, depicted as strolling cluelessly along the famous city promenade. Their message was that politicians are willfully ignoring problems or, at best, paying lip service to them in the conference setting. Meanwhile, the French special envoy at the conference, Olivier Poivre d'Arvor, insisted that what was decided in Nice cannot be undone and no illegal path is acceptable. This triggered a wave of responses from NGOs, with some deriding this stance as the same predictable brand of confident talk that collapses in the face of real commercial pressure. Despite the swirl of controversies, the summit also spotlighted positive signs involving expansions in marine protected areas, such as French Polynesia's pledge to create the world's largest marine protected zone. Buoyed by the impetus of the summit, some 95 countries announced tentative support for a French-led initiative to clamp down on plastic production and use, with the aim of pushing forward a comprehensive global plastics treaty. Plastic waste is recognized as one of the most rampant forms of pollution affecting nearly every ocean habitat, from shorelines to remote underwater trenches. There is a sense that if enough countries consistently champion the cause, they could curb plastics at their source. But the next round of negotiations has been scheduled for Geneva in August, leaving open the question of how fast all these interested states can move. So, was the Third United Nations Ocean Conference a series of empty gestures or a genuine turning point for ocean sustainability? Many participants see it as something in between. On the one hand, it showcased a long list of new bilateral and multinational commitments, from Canada's vow to cut shipping-related underwater noise to Germany's historical push to eliminate submerged explosives in the Baltic and North Seas. On the other hand, enormous challenges remain with bridging talk and effective action. Without robust accountability, cynics worry that these achievements will vanish into the same bureaucratic haze that has befallen earlier climate and ocean summits. Indeed, one official at the UNOC3 press office quietly admitted that the gap between promised resources and actual ratifications is still extremely wide. While 19 new countries stepped up to ratify the High Seas Treaty during the talks, critics noted the goal of 60 or more countries remains out of reach if major powers drag their feet. Now, if you are enthralled by the twists and turns of international diplomacy, you might be wondering, where does this leave the future of the planet's watery expanses? We also asked that question, examining the sentiments of island nations that believe they might not even survive the coming half-century if sea levels continue to rise and storms intensify. The consensus from those nations is that no summit alone can protect them from the combined assault of climate change and ocean degradation, but every single piece of legal machinery that can be mustered is a step forward. Indeed, there was an impassioned speech by the Foreign Minister of Costa Rica, Arnoldo André Tinoco, urging quick movement on financing ocean protection. He declared that it is not enough to pledge new funds. Each pledge must be tracked meticulously. The audience gave an enthusiastic round of applause for his candor, but the real test, as always, will come in the follow-up phases. And now, since we are right at a moment of heightened excitement about potential breakthroughs in ocean conservation, I invite you to show your support. If you appreciate these profound revelations about the behind-the-scenes drama of marine diplomacy, take a moment to let us know your thoughts, maybe share this story onward, or give it a boost in the simplest way you can. Every nod of engagement helps bring more people into the conversation. But let us not forget that summits often rely on symbolic gestures, and occasionally those gestures carry significant weight. A stirring moment came when a Polynesian cultural representative, Ludovic Burns Tukey, blew a pew, a traditional conch shell. This centuries-old navigator's call signaled solidarity and, symbolically, called upon the spirits of the ancestors to protect future generations. David Attenborough, who made a cameo with video footage depicting the state of the oceans in his newly released film titled simply Ocean, underscored how swiftly marine habitats are deteriorating. If charismatic figures continue to highlight the unfolding crises in creative and visual ways, public concern could translate into greater political will. But we must remember that only consistent follow-through ensures progress. Behind the curtain, old tensions linger. Some wealthy nations can easily finance big environmental programs, while low-income nations, often on the front lines of rising sea levels, lack the resources to cope with the devastation. The argument is that countries with greater historic responsibility for pollution owe it to others to fund the shift to a cleaner future. Though intangible in many ways, the ocean is the circulatory system of Earth, distributing heat, absorbing carbon, and sustaining biodiversity that, in turn, sustains us. The complexity lies in forging workable agreements in a global environment where commercial interests remain powerful. No matter how strong the calls for a plastics ban or a deep-sea mining moratorium may become, there will undoubtedly be some states that see the ocean's resources as opportunities for economic growth. While that clash might sound unavoidable, the introduction of frameworks like the High Seas Treaty can help blunt the worst impulses, provided they pass the threshold of ratifications and lead to real enforcement. Even so, not everything turned sour in Nice. The sense of unity spiked when delegates from small island nations took the stage to share personal narratives of how rising sea levels and fish stock depletion are already impacting their communities. Some speakers from places like the Pacific region underscored that whole cultures stand to vanish if the wheels of climate-driven dispossession cannot be halted. In many ways, that sincerity hammered home the idea that the fate of the ocean is more than an abstract environmental concern. It is a frontline struggle for survival for millions living on coasts and islands. The presence of newly formed blocs like the High Ambition Coalition for a Quiet Ocean gave them hope that specialized issues, such as shipping noise or unexploded munitions, would not be sidelined in mainstream discussions. But if you are still wondering whether all these commitments will mean anything once the conference spotlight fades, you are not alone. Veteran oceanographers at the event quietly cautioned that lofty announcements never automatically translate into real change. That shift takes domestic legislation, new regulatory frameworks, broad-based corporate compliance, and public pressure to ensure that neither short-term profit nor political convenience undercut the pledges made. Perhaps that is the essential message from Peter Thompson, the UN's own special envoy for the ocean, who concluded that the real test is not what is said at the conference, but what actually happens afterwards. Thompson reminded everyone that the world took an important step once by enshrining Sustainable Development Goal 14 regarding life underwater, but so much more remains to be done. In the broader scope, the underlying friction at the Third United Nations Ocean Conference demonstrates an eternal tug-of-war between hope and skepticism, short-term politics and planetary well-being, national sovereignty and international responsibility. While the atmosphere of Nice buzzed with urgent appeals and righteous demands, the entire enterprise teeters on whether these sentiments get translated into laws strong enough to deter exploitation. Are we simply pushing back the tide of destruction, or can it be reversed? All told, watching these 5 days in Nice was like viewing a complex theatrical performance, choreographed, replete with official speeches and fervent behind-closed-doors lobbying. Adding to the spectacle, the presence of creative protests, like those staged by Ocean Rebellion, offered comedic relief but also pointed barbs. Macron, lightly ridiculed in costume as a blind traveler on the Promenade des Anglais, was not the only leader singled out. Discussions had their share of friction whenever the United States was alluded to, especially after the Secretary General's critique of deep-sea mining. Outside the official venue, delegates from countries working hard on greening their fishing fleets shared stories of being overshadowed by the commercial might of large industrial fleets, prompting further debate on the fairness of ocean resource distribution. After all the talk, the final press conference featured Li Jinhua, the hard-working Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs and Secretary General of the conference, who insisted that the pledges from the week must be implemented, tracked, and scaled. The question is how. At the same time, one can see that if significant numbers of states follow through on the High Seas Treaty, on the new plastics initiative, and on the bold expansions of marine protected areas, these few days in Nice might be remembered as a pivotal moment. Certainly, the intangible sense of momentum is there, and it could shift the tide of ocean diplomacy in a more ambitious direction. That glimmer of possibility, that sense that the time to protect our oceans is well overdue, is what has many watchers of the conference expressing guarded optimism. That is why it is worth staying tuned for updates. For those of you who appreciate this kind of deep dive into global politics and the high drama of environmental summits, this is your shot to voice your opinions. Maybe share this storyline or tap the follow button if you are eager for more. Now is the time for measured discussion, bold steps, and a refusal to let the momentum slip away. Calls to action from campaigners can be easily forgotten once cameras are off, but so can government promises if the pressure vanishes. The ocean transcends borders, so no single country can fix or degrade it alone. Collaborative triumph or collective failure awaits, depending on our next moves. All these developments from the Third United Nations Ocean Conference point to a lesson repeated time and again in global governance. If you want the job done right, you cannot rely on half measures. Those from low-lying island states are literally watching their homelands sink, while experts keep warning that when coral reefs die, entire oceanic ecosystems may collapse. Yet among all the politicking, we see rays of hope in the forging of new treaties. The expansion of partnerships like the High Ambition Coalition for a Quiet Ocean, and the infusion of financial muscle into marine conservation. Will it be enough, or is it already too late? In the final analysis, let us be clear. Nice was no magical solution, but it is a step, potentially an important one, on a road where each increment matters. Momentum must be maintained, because once an ecosystem collapses, it may never recover. We will continue to watch whether key nations decide to speed up ratifications, invest in real enforcement, and ensure that these promising words become something tangible. When you hear about countries that champion new marine protected areas one day, only to quietly condone destructive fishing the next. Remember that the difference between talk and transformation lies in consistent vigilance and the readiness of the international community to hold everyone accountable. That may be the lasting imprint of this conference, raising the question of how we unify global forces to prevent oceanic collapse. So, was the Third United Nations Ocean Conference a triumph or just another diplomatic spectacle? The answer is not cut and dried. It offered hope. It offered partial breakthroughs. It amplified new voices. Yet the dreaded follow-through remains the ultimate measure of success. If we truly believe the terrifying claim that we could witness irreparable harm to marine habitats within the next few decades, the time for half commitments is long gone. Let hope that the world's governments, from iconic ocean nations like Indonesia and Costa Rica to economic powerhouses like the United States and member states across Europe, collectively seize this moment to keep the momentum going and implement real change. Because once that fish stock is depleted, once that coral reef is bleached beyond repair, or that coastal community is forced to flee rising waters, no belated conference vow will resurrect what has been lost.